Anyway,
it's Sunday. It's 10:30. It can only mean time for the Keruffle podcast.
If you come here illegally, you will be detained and swiftly removed. People need to know that coming here illegally on a boat will not lead them to a life in the United Kingdom.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. That's the match of the day introduction you didn't get last night.
no, absolutely. Well-known, adored celebrity offers opinion on subject he knows nothing about. But enough about me and a estate agency for the last 3 decades.
Hey.
How are you, David?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm all right. I'm just looking though. I'm a bit. I mean, maybe I'm always a bit ghostly, but don't you think I look a bit ethereal on the screen? There's something going on with the camera here, or anyway.
You do look a little bit otherworldly.
Thank you.
And from your otherworldly perspective,
Yeah.
what do you make of the whole Lineker fiasco? Come on,
Yeah.
only you and me, anyway.
It's all absolute nonsense. Totally caught up by a lack of consistency and a lack of clear definitions, isn't it? The amount of when you look at the amount of people that are making political decisions. Andrew Neil, editor of The Spectator, Alan Sugar posting pictures of Nazis and Corbyn, Martin Lewis, Portillo. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. And for them to have pandered to that bunch of Tory MPs asking for him to go is I honestly don't. The one thing I just don't understand is how that Richard Sharp is still even vaguely there after all the loaning of the money to Boris and everything else.
That's why this for them, this whole Lineker fiasco is so compelling, because it deflects from what they are actually doing in terms of immigration policy. It deflects from what's going on at the BBC, but it's now, I mean, all hats off to everybody that's walked out or refused to work at the BBC this weekend. I think it will elevate this debate possibly a couple of steps higher than what Gary Lineker thinks. And for all of those people that say that Gary Lineker shouldn't draw comparisons with a certain period in history, I'm sorry, but it's a little bit naive to collect. We get my people, we get very precious about that period in history because it's in a class of its own. It's in a sort of class of one, much in the same way that you Liverpool fans get upset about the Hillsborough disaster. But in terms of how that rhetoric would play out today, to me, it's very worrying. If you come from any kind of immigrant background and you ever needed help, why would you allow that kind of conversation to carry on?
No,
from frontline politicians. And so I think most of the public blissfully unaware, the rest of the public very much Brexited up to the gills and think that this is their Brexit policy playing out across the screens. But we can make it all about Lineker.
Yeah, and it's really, really important. I was shouting, as I do every single week, at the TV and Question Time on Thursday, where they'd instantly gone to the straw man argument, and they were going in and saying, "Oh, he's comparing us to the Nazis." He didn't at all. If you read the actual detail of that tweet, it was very, very. I bet it was one of those, not like me, who knocks it out and then says, "I wish I hadn't sent it." He spoke about the language being very similar, and you can't disagree with that. The other thing is as well, for Suella Braverman to offer a surprise, she was told by one of your people, wasn't she, recently at a meeting, to tone down the rhetoric, to tone down the language because of exactly this reason. So you can't start coming back and telling people that actually we didn't have a clue and all the rest of it. But I think, again, it comes back to the whole, people talk about cancel culture and everything else. There is, what are they worried about? I mean, they used to talk about the BBC as being lefty. It's virtually the media arm now of the Conservative Party.
That's it. How now could any of us trust a single word that they put out, knowing full well that they've taken this action? I mean, he agreed that he was going to stop. He's not going to talk about it on air, and I think this is the biggest bit of irony. The BBC entirely, in true Tory fashion as well, but entirely inconsistent with their rhetoric, they allowed Gary Lineker a platform on Match of the Day to talk about human rights in Qatar.
Yeah.
Right? If you remember, he opened up his introduction. He was talking about the worrying state of human rights in Qatar. So don't give the guy a platform to talk about human rights and say that he's not allowed to talk about it when it makes us look bad. Yeah.
I thought you might raise this today, so I took just one clip off the old Twitter, and it was a video from 2018 on the BBC website, and it says Gary is not involved in any news or political output for the BBC, and as such, any expression of his personal political views does not affect the BBC's impartiality. And this was when he was talking about talking about the Brexit and the referendum campaign. So that, as they quite rightly said, that was 2018. What's changed in 2023? They really, I mean, what this is down to, let's be honest, is they just haven't got clear. And anyone who's been into a business relationship or something like that, where you don't get it defined clearly enough, this was kind of inevitable. And so probably the conversation needed to be happening, but it should have been happening within closed doors of the BBC. And anyone, that's really interesting. Whatever issue you are going on as a business, you need to get it resolved. Otherwise, it can overrun the story, can't it?
Yeah, it becomes a completely different story. But I think this is dead convenient for them. I think this is the best kind of deflection and distraction campaign they can ever have. Yeah. Meanwhile, you can't buy salad items in the supermarket. I mean, what are we going to do?
Yeah. I know. It's luckily I've always been allergic to that aisle, so it's not really been
Simon Whale, tell us of your travels this week, because you locked me away in an office and said don't leave, and so I was here all week.
No, I said no.
You've been traveling the country.
I said you're in charge. Those magical words.
That's what you meant. Right, yeah. But you've been traveling the country, meeting the great and good of the property industry. Tell us who you've met, conversations you're having. What's the tone of the discussion?
I went down to lovely Gillingham and Maidstone, where even though it's down south, it doesn't have Uber. So I was a little bit shocked in my ivory tower getting down there. I went for the wonderful partnership group, one of Peter Knight's groups, with our software suppliers, where we do the old software OPEC thing and decide how many double-digit raises to be launched. That was absolutely great. Always nice to get together with a great group of people. Everyone from kind of like Money Penny, Data Loft. You've got the mortgage guys. We were down with Jamie Bartholomew. So just to sound about things, how we can better help out agents is always a nice is always a nice story there. Then I had what else did I have? I had obviously the Fine and Country conference on Friday. That was a really, really good bash. I think normally they have those back to back, the Guild and Guild of Estate Agents.
Yeah, they sort of follow on, don't they?
I think it, and I don't think it really does follow on as well. So I think them splitting it out, actually, it's great. I mean, just obviously Fine and Country's just got such fantastic agents in there. I think Ben Madden, many people know, won the big one. John Hanford was in there again. All your favourites, your Mark Mannings, your Simon Bradburys. And wonderfully invited by my good friend Mr. Ian McKenzie to see how they do it, and that was great.
And you've got some fans that are commenting. This one here says you were lucky you didn't have any important family stuff going on. And a very happy 50th birthday to Simon's partner Rachel.
So you know this, David, probably better than I'm not a detailed person. Yes, I did forget that the 50th birthday was whilst I was away at the software supplier group. So
don't worry about it. It's only a 50th birthday. There'll be another one coming up soon.
No, sorry. And look, I'm waiting to be let in from the shed any day now. So she's It's not like ginger people are not forgiving, isn't it, or have a long memory or anything.
Do not anger them. Do not anger them. So, what's the vibe at the Fine and Country Conference? I've never been to one. Is it more? Is it educational? Is it inspirational?
I think obviously because it's top end, prime, whatever you want to, a lot of it is so much about the brand. They do some really great stuff, obviously, in terms of as ever with the charity work there. I think what I love about it is, as every good affiliation group should be, there's a real strong camaraderie. And I think the really uplifting thing for me, there was Malcolm Prescott from Weber's went on stage to talk about Napoleon Wilcox, who was a fantastic Fine and Country, one of the biggest advocates, really, really sadly died.
Huge personality, wasn't he, as well?
He was going back to, I can already imagine in this very right-wing industry, people shouting the start of our thing there. But not that you would ever pigeonhole Napoleon as being, a lefty or anything like that. But he had such a fierce right, what's right is right and everything else there. And I know we would have been jumping on Facebook together and having a good thing. So they launched the Napoleon Wilcox Award on Friday, which I think is always wonderful to see people remembering him that way. Obviously, it's a beautiful eulogy from Malcolm Prescott there as well, and the first person who won it over Thomas Morris very successfully, and I think just great to see, obviously, that kind of doing the right thing there. So that was a particularly poignant moment. There wasn't really a dry eye in the house as well.
Talking of poignant moments, maybe this is a time to segue to another. We know that several people from the industry are flying out to the south of France this week for MIPIM, which is an entirely different small boat crisis of its own. And I just wanted to say to all of those that are flying out there, I get it. It's totally about work. You are being selfless. You're taking one for the entire industry. So yeah,
we're talking about you, Ben Beadle. Yeah, I do. I always love. He's very tongue in cheek. Yes, I'm off to work for you people.
Do you know what I do get? I don't get FOMO out of many industry events. If you tell me I have to stay at home, I'll stay at home. But MIPIM has always been one of those where I thought I'd love to see what goes on over there. Have you ever been?
No, because of course I get seasick standing on a boat in the Thames. So even though it's pathetic and obviously all of those ridiculous yachts and things like that are obviously tied up, I know there would be a Simon Whale incident. So it's not been one I do need to knock it off in my kind of conference bingo thing, but I want to do Inman and things like that in the States before I face the end of level boss with MIPIM.
But I'm sure there's a lot of international work to mop up if you get out there.
Yeah, it's cool. Never mind that, Mr. Mintz. Let's just skip past events and everything else. You had your own very prominent event. We haven't caught up, obviously, not on podcast. Let's just say we've had a bit on this year, haven't we? So we are. We apart from Gary Lineker, we were forced back obviously on air. But there was the Women in Estate Agency Conference.
Yes, yeah.
A great supporter of, took a great part in. Congratulations, thought you were absolutely wonderful and lovely, as you always are. But then I'm biased. What did you, to use?
I honestly think that they did a wonderful job of pulling it off in such a sort of short period of time, because they weren't organizing this for sort of months and months and months. And I thought that the tone in the room was unique. It was different. It was very different from other conferences. So they promised to do it differently, and they absolutely delivered on that promise. And to me, the fact that the actual conference center itself was actually quite a nice little venue once you got into it. Yeah, very unassuming from the outside. It's sort of you go on, underneath the ground, one level, and they've got this auditorium which is set up.
That's how stairs work, by the way, David. Just so you know.
That's it. The stairs can go up and down. Those just putting that out there for those stairs fans. But
you're having an opinion on stairs there, David. Remain balanced.
It looked like, when you looked out of that auditorium, it did look like a special session of the UN, because you had all these people sat at desks, and and I thought that was good, because it meant it was difficult to shuffle out mid session. So a lot of people stayed in the room. It was well lit. You could take notes. People felt, you could sort of spread out a bit. It was decent, and I thought the mix of content was great.
First of all, the different point you made there is the only other one that I felt, and it so often is, it's never just about the people you put on stage, is it? It's about the way that people bounce back and interact with you. And I think for me, it had vibes of the Agent Rainmaker one, with obviously Sally Lawson there. And of course, probably no surprise there, obviously Sally, coming from a similar place as well. So I thought there was so much, to use again the RC phrase, energy bouncing back from it there. Everybody was willing everyone on the stage, the stage well. And
I think that is the biggest thing. You talk about whether a conference is a success at all. We all know that there are certain people that turn up to conferences and they're being a supporter, but actually they're saying, "Oh, this is shit again this year." But actually, every person that was sat in the room wanted it. They were willing that on to be a success. So it really, the content turned out to be excellent. But I'm of the opinion that it could have been sub-excellent and still would have got a standing ovation, because this is what people felt that they needed, and they felt that they needed it, that platform. And just, I think, the feedback I've had from people who attended is I know a lot of people sort of went, "Oh, best conference ever," but there were people who said, "Look, I think conferences for the future should have more educational content," and it is different. When you take out that mix, the whole, and I know you love awards more than anything in the world, but when you take the awards and the competition element out of it, it does become a very, very different event.
Yeah. Yes, to go along. I mean, there was elements of almost like a TED talk in there as well, listening to people talking about that. I said to you when the first lady, and sorry, what was you'll remember, what was the first lady on the panel who was talking about the menopause and everything else?
Nicola Green.
So when it was a panel show, and of course I hadn't bothered to talk to you as I never do about obviously what's going to happen, and so you introduced the panel show. She started off, and she went into a really quite long discussion about her terrible experience, misdiagnosis of the menopause, and the 6 and 7 years that she'd lived with this and all the horrible stuff around. And at first I was feeling really uncomfortable, because I thought, hang on a minute, if this is a panel show, they're meant to bounce back, and you're meant to get 1 minute here, but actually then when I realized, it went on to the next lady who spoke about kind of well-being, and well, obviously I don't listen too well to people who talk about looking after yourself well. Stephen Brown was obviously there as well. I found that format really, really refreshing, in terms of you were able to do it justice without feeling the need to just drag somebody in and just have a chat about something. Again, going back to the Gary Lineker or me, we didn't actually have anything about. And again, I suppose if there was one criticism, I went in there, of course, feeling absolutely smug. Wokey whale, doing the right thing. I thought, I've always done the right thing, and then I was actually obviously really, really surprised that there were so many men in there, and that was absolutely fantastic to see all the supporters obviously who were going along wanting to show the support for it as well. But when I obviously was speaking to a lot of those, they weren't saying it was good because it was just doing the good thing for women in the state agency. It was just good per se, and that's how everything should be judged, wasn't it? On that basis, as to did it deliver on the basics.
I think the danger with those kind of panels is that you're talking about topics that are huge. I mean, think about it. Menopause, not only huge, but something that you and I are not qualified to talk about particularly well.
But David, you're wrong. This is where I particularly did. I thought I knew about it. So of course, I know what HRT is. And so when I got into it, and then obviously she went into the the levels of misdiagnosis, what that can lead to. That was when suddenly I started, as I always do, I have a knowledge at a generalist level, and to be able to understand better when she was talking quite rightly about should it be much more, there'd be much more awareness in smaller businesses, and it's like, well, whilst women are still having menopauses in smaller businesses, how can you not?
Yeah, and in many ways, when you've got a smaller business, those sort of events in key personnel's life are going to affect the business more, because they play out in a much smaller arena. But it's not like you've got 20 other people sat there ready to take over or to supplement or to help or whatever it is. So I think it is important for small businesses. But there were huge topics, and there were some that were it was a very emotional day as well, because how can you listen to, say, Stephen Brown's story, which I think, hats off to Stephen. We know the thing is with Stephen, and I said this to him before the day, because we were discussing, what do you want me to ask you, sort of thing. And he said, look, I've got a letter that I'm going to be reading out that Sam left. And I just, there's nothing you can say to that, because it's something that he felt that other people needed to hear. And actually, when he read out those words, and it's all about looking after yourself, all about not leaving all the things unsaid or undone for another day. Just seize that moment, and just, as he says, just fucking do it.
Yeah. I've never been accused of not seizing the moment, by the way, or living every day as if it was my last.
No, you've been accused of seizing too much of the moment. Yeah. But I think that made that sort of resonated with everybody, because I think that is something that, dealing with grief and that emotion, we're all guilty of putting stuff off. We're all guilty of not sometimes fulfilling our absolute potential, and we take life for granted. I thought Amy Shields' section, where she talked about anxiety, and everybody got to their feet to do that practical sort of breathing test that she did. I thought that was, you don't get that at events.
Let's be honest, that enforced extra hard breathing was probably why half the people ended up with, ironically, man flu. Blow in, blow out.
For me, the absolute sort of standout moment of the day, and I think this is probably the same for most people, was when Claire Yates took to the stage, and she shared her story again, but in a very different context. Because perhaps I think I've heard the story as many people in the industry did on Chris Watkins' sofa in that interview. And she went into sort of further detail on stage, and she told the story of how she was raped. People prefer to use the term sexually assaulted, but it was full on, from that story. And I think there was some advice that she gave to the men in the room, which was the bit that, to me, that was just, because we all go to parties, to do's, to whatever, where somebody will have one too many, and they'll either say something or do something or touch something that it shouldn't be touching. And it's what we all do. Do we just go, it's him being him, or do we actually say, listen, mate, that's got to stop, and it's got to stop now?
I had a bit of your fantastic new program that you were doing the other day, and you had Megan on, and you were talking about this subject, and I thought, and you know what, apart from as I went through and I had tears in my eyes and said, that's my fellow, I love what he's doing, I had a bit of a problem with actually you and Megan talking about this. Whilst I agreed entirely with the rhetoric, and you were obviously reiterating what you're saying now, I don't know whether it was you or whether Megan said, oh, he's getting a bit handsy. Now, it just sounds, that's such a cop-out. It is.
Well, I'll tell you something. So it's interesting. As she was saying those words, I thought back to a very recent incident where I was sat on a table, there were some women there, and a man sat down, and he put his arm around And whatever this bit of a woman's body is, you may refer to it as the love handles. But he put their
on me, it's a fat back.
But you wouldn't put your hand there unless you were extremely comfortable with that person or familiar with that person.
Yeah.
And afterwards, I didn't think anything of it when I saw it, because I just thought to myself, well, okay, those two people clearly know each other very well and they're very comfortable with one another. And afterwards, I said to the lady, I said, oh, I didn't realize that you and so were so close. And she said to me, I've never met him before. And so to me, that was a moment where I, as a male, should have been more attuned, perhaps, to noticing that her body language wasn't accepting, that in actual fact, she was deeply uncomfortable. And I should have perhaps challenged it myself, but I didn't. But after Claire's words, I don't think there'll ever be a moment where I'm totally comfortable with it. And I want to just say one other thing, which is not everybody knows about. But immediately after Claire's segment, there were a lot of women that exited the room in a hurry. They were very upset. And I went outside where there was a sort of a group of smokers around that door. But there were literally women pouring out of there who had very similar experiences, and that hearing it from Claire live on stage, if you like, sort of triggered it again. But they all got to tell their story that day, and I think that doesn't happen normally at conferences, and whether you like it or not, that delivered. It delivered.
Let's just pop up Megan's points here, because she's making the points here. Can we also say that Claire Yates dressing the men in the room was so powerful? But she goes on to say, quite rightly, this is the point, Simon. I've had multiple people say, oh, so-and-so is handsy after a drink. And that was the start of a slippery slope that we didn't call him out at the time. I think so, but here's the thing, Megan. All I'm saying on the subject, and they agree entirely, is that almost by calling it handsy, doesn't it? It lets them off, because it's almost a fun name by itself. And of course, if this is such a serious subject, then it should be called out for what it is. And I can't believe I'm saying this, because obviously, it's not me trying to be wokey or anything about that, but that why, for me, things like the Women in the State Agency, the group and the movement is important, because I think it's absolutely vital to have these kind of discussions about what you term appropriate there. Because here's the other thing as well, isn't it? I can well imagine loads of men shouting at the screen and saying, hang on, he put his arm round her, he might not have meant anything by it at all, there was nothing sexually overt and everything else. And so just the awareness of what is still appropriate, even if you weren't meaning anything, that conversation needs to be had to educate men just to act properly, don't they?
I think if you're ever, because this is a very, so there's a lot of people watching this who are a certain type of person or male that will be going, oh, look at them, they're going all woke and they're agreeing with it all. But I think the absolute, to anybody that's worrying about whether or not they are the right side of that very, very difficult tightrope that we all need to balance, think about it in terms of if it's your daughter. That's all you have to do. Are you comfortable with somebody getting that familiar with your daughter under those circumstances? And if the answer to that is no, it's time to step up, definitely. And I think that is the acid test to me, and when you ask men that question, they take it very different. Oh, well, you're talking about my daughter. Well, that's different.
Yeah, and
you're not as reasonable all of a sudden.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, Megan, I thought your bit was. I really enjoyed your announcement. You doing the announcements about the esters. That was when the slides came up. That was really good to see. But your one about personal brand was a really good story, as we always knew it was going to be. So I thought that was, and I thought Els was great as well, doesn't it?
It was good. I don't think there was a bad speaker at all that day. It was all, it was very good quality.
So that's off. Looking forward to the next one. And as you know, there can never be enough conferences, David. That's the one truth.
I'm just going to cover off these last two comments from Megan, but she said, I just want to put some apostrophes into this sentence as well, because it says, I told David off. No, she told David, comma, off air about a particular person who I was told was handsy, who I ended up putting somebody in a taxi to avoid being subjected further. Years later, that person turned out to be a rapist. Whereas when women warn women, we say how it is, but I'm guilty of not calling it out. People, for it is just warning. Okay.
Cool.
There we go.
Yeah.
There was some announcements that day, but it was good. It was, and also actually I have to say, supplier involvement on the day was very sort of muted almost. It was there just to support. It wasn't rammed down your throat. There were some people that had stands. I thought the Right Move area where you could write things on that wall, I thought that was a really neat idea, actually.
And look, they need again, although it's maybe a drop in the ocean to them, you still have to go out of your way to do it. The fact they rushed in and sponsored and became platinum sponsors or the main sponsors, whatever it was, from day one, needs to be celebrated, because if they are backing stuff like that, that's fantastic. And they do have that. Is it Find You're Happy or whatever else? That couldn't align anymore, could it, with whatever everyone was trying to talk about that day, really?
Yeah, no, I thought it was a very healthy day. It was cathartic. I think we all needed it, and yeah.
So what else are you watching at the moment? Because I've been really enjoying the Mr. Watkins Stats show. I think that's been have you caught any of those?
Yeah, I've been watching those. I had on that other show that I was doing with I had Matt Baldock on. We were talking about the relevance of those stats, and you love stats and all those figures. I know that.
No, I don't understand.
And there are some agents that absolutely thrive on it. My question always is with these things is how much do they matter to the man on the street, the woman on the street, whoever's selling that house?
Does it push the boat forwards?
Does it make the boat go faster, Richard? Does it make the boat go faster? And I think ultimately, what Chris is trying to do, rather sensibly, is rationalize the sensational headlines that the Daily Mail would have us believe that this economy and also the housing market in particular is a dumpster fire that is never going to go out and that we're in trouble. And I think Chris is taking stats and pundits, if you like, to comment on the fact that actually it's not as bad. But the one thing that I think does come out of all of those conversations is that volume, in terms of the amount that we're going to sell this year, is going to be lower. Yeah. And are we prepared for that?
Yeah, did you see, I know you obviously pore over this, but did you go through Property Industry Eye? One of the things that you and I, being train spotters, is we like to, rather than just actually look at the actual stories that interest as well, it's always really interesting to see how disproportionate the clicks are on certain stories. And so, of course, when you will, for like a popular story, get a couple of thousand or 5,000 views on a normal Property Industry Eye, that UK house prices predicted to drop by at least 10%. Yes, unsurprisingly, got 33,000 clicks on it to do that. But I think what's been fascinating, it was really interesting when I mentioned we were talking in, and it'd be unfair to name them again now, but we were in that room of suppliers the other day, and we were saying, one of the things we do is check in and see what people are saying around it. And these people represent at various different levels, 90 to 95% of the market with, the crossover of client base. And although transactions, are looking, aren't looking particularly great or anything else, I know Chris says it's a return to normality, but transactions, those suppliers that actually are transactionally based have been really feeling the pinch at the moment. The other really weird thing was actually that's not the story we're hearing so much from the agents, because whatever else, after the mini budget at the end of last year, that they are happy. It's always about expectation level, isn't it? They have actually quite pleased as to what they've returned back to.
Yeah, no, I think that this market, if you would have said to us at the end of last year, we all knew that the party had stopped. We all knew that the music switched off a long time ago, but the public just hadn't caught up with it. Yeah. And I think there was a sense that this was going to fall off a cliff edge for some people. Yeah. And if you would have given me the market that we've now got, I would have said, oh, that's just 10 times better than I thought it was going to be. So I think we do have to be grateful for that. And I think Chris's stats show, I think that is important. It's important to agents so that they are then taking from that the lessons and can then in the living room perhaps re-educate a prospective seller and just sort of say, look, actually, we've checked the figures here. The national average is this. In our area, to that, we're actually going to be okay for a bit. So let's crack on. But I think it's an interesting show, and he's taking stats. I think if I'm not mistaken, I'm not telling tales out of school, but I think those stats come from 20EA.
Yeah, they're absolutely fantastic. I mean,
that data is unbelievable. What they've got there, absolutely unbelievable.
You know, he does. He unashamedly shouts about it. You know, he always talks about that. It comes from those guys, and I think they really, they do some fantastic stuff. And it shows, obviously, as well. I think as well, just the sheer level of detail and accuracy that they can go to as well. So
I'm not sure it counts when Megan 18 says it because she's a bit of a fangirl, but people want the podcast back, Simon. What do you say?
Yeah.
You're going to give them back what they want?
I don't know. I think I was going to say let's keep them like the slavering whores that they are, and then I realised that could have been absolutely massively misinterpreted, and I was going to get hit with my own brush. Yeah, look, I think so. I think we've had a busy couple of months, haven't we, David? To be honest, as you know, what's been going on at Keruffle Towers and everything else. We've been fantastic.
It's great. It's crazy, but I think we should tackle that in our next episode. So if you tune in bright and early next Sunday, we'll tell you about the exciting stuff that's going on behind the scenes at Keruffle Towers.
Oh, great! Now we have to do some actual preparation and work, do we? This is outrageous.
Hold yourself accountable. Set yourself some goals. Talking of which, what are you doing this week?
Do you know what? I don't even. That's again. You caught me out there. I don't even know. Is admin and catching up an actual thing? I'm not. Sure. Well, you and I have failed because we've been promising to do these ebooks and
It's true. It's true. They say everyone's got a book in them. I've got 6 ebooks waiting to come out. So I'm hoping we can crack that this week and continue to bring the industry the very best of prop tech and property industry discussion. It's a very interesting time reading the industry press at the moment because it's somehow it's like a mixture of paid advertising in terms of who's merging. There's lots of M&A stuff going on at the moment, loads and loads and loads.
And by the way, that ain't slowing. Whether you're listening, obviously Lucy was talking about that was where, obviously she's had that fantastic journey herself, obviously coming out of LSL, but just from herself, seeing the amount of deals that she's doing, and of course there are other business transfer agents as well there. And when I've been speaking to some of the corporates, and we've been doing the interviews, sort of the influencer pieces, although we've had a huge amount over the last 2 years, they don't see that slowing up anytime soon. So I think that's, I never know whether I get that excited about it though, because one of the saddest things for me, as I've said many times, has not been the indomitable rise of the online agent, but it's actually been about the corporate largely scooping up the sort of the middle tier of agents, because you witness a load of really well-known independent brands, get absorbed, and often actually the name does disappear after a period of time. And that's, maybe I'm being melancholy and a bit too.
You know what I'd love to do? I'd love to get Lucy on the show at some point. Maybe she should consider being our guest. I'd love to know what it is that's motivating people to sell at the moment. Is it that they're sort of jaded and fed up, and the estate agency breaks us down to the point that, at some point that exit's inevitable? Are there still people out there that want to remain business owners till their sort of retirement days? I'd love to know what the word on the street is. What's motivating?
Did you see? I think that's a really good idea. Did you see the interview we did with Adam Walker? Obviously, operates in a similar place, and there is obviously there's a degree of truth in that as well. The other, but you're looking at I think it was Plimsoll, the accountants people, and they just did some really simple analysis of showing what the average age of directors are in estate agents, and obviously I think it was approaching the near 70s. So of course, the need to exit, to not be the richest guy in the graveyard is one of those driving ones. But also as well, one of the existential threats is that so many people want to hand on the business to the junior partners in the business, but they don't have the accessibility to funds or are unwilling to put their home on the line to make that happen. And that leads to actually, well, there only is, a few options in terms of out to everyone else. So as I said, I don't find it it's great that people who've worked all their lives get the ability to recognize it, but I suppose it corrects itself though as well, doesn't it? So quite often you do see those independents that have been absorbed, the figures start to drop off as they lose their culture, they lose their people, and then the up and coming guys obviously naturally. So maybe it's just the way of the world, isn't it? Is probably the overall view.
Yeah, and I think that what's interesting about our industry now is that at the bottom end of that, if you like, of the same funnel. So you've got people coming out the top with big, mature, established businesses. You've also got people coming into the business with nothing but a telephone and a computer, which has never been in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. That wasn't the case. If you wanted to set up, you had to compete on the traditional high street offering. And I think the barrier to entry into our industry now is lower than it's ever been before.
Yeah. I had a really interesting MOT this week at one of our supplier MOTs where we sat down, and it was a lovely fellow up in Glasgow who'd started an own up, and he literally was doing exactly as you said, telephone. He'd obviously set up Rightmove and everything else. But to hear his enthusiasm, so I'm saying are you using anything by the way of prospecting tools? He's like, I'm literally working off word of mouth there and the personal brand thing. And again, doubling down a little bit in terms of what Megan was saying. He puts out bits of video. I think we had Jim on earlier. Jim obviously owns the airwaves in his own digital patch, isn't it? There is such a meritocracy about agency today, in some levels, isn't it? Is that you really can punch disproportionately above your level.
I think so.
And
I think that's ultimately that is the leverage sometimes as well that prop tech can give you as well, because whether you like it or not, and there's a lot of people out there going, it's not all about the tech. It isn't about the tech, it's about the people, but it's about those people being able to do more on their own because they've got support. And because
what tech is always about, isn't it? At its core, is about being scalable and allowing you to do more with less. So if it's able to put more of you out there and to get to more people there, that's got to be the way it goes. It's like this whole conversation we were having the other day, wasn't it? About I know we've spoken off air, we've spoken on air with Jerry about ChatGPT and what that's doing in terms of obviously content and how it's changed around. Did you see this story? It did catch my eye. So Search Acumen integrates ChatGPT in a bid to speed up transactions. Now, I found that fascinating. There's another, I was told in secret, but another of the CRM packages is just integrating ChatGPT into its application.
I heard of one that heard of a business yesterday that was set up to train surveyors in their APC examination using ChatGPT. So basically, you drop your thesis in one end, it will produce model questions based on it. There are massive applications for ChatGPT, well beyond content writing.
Yeah,
and I think that we're only just scraping the surface. I think it's a very.
I think it's incredibly exciting because.
So I'm going to promise you this.
Mm.
I don't know how we're going to deliver, but I'm going to promise you this.
We never worry about that.
No, I'm going to get an actual AI expert on the show so we can ask them about the future and particularly about how it might feed into prop tech. And I'd also like to get somebody who does a lot of M&A activity on as well. I'd like it if Lucy could join us, but can be other people too. And we should cover that next time because I've got to now go and do something extremely middle class and collect my daughter from her tutor.
Oh, so, Well, look, lovely to be back, Megan. Yes, we're back in it now. As long as I am able to wake up in the morning, we will be doing this.
Enjoy, everybody. Have a great week.
Have a good one. Cheers, guys.